Now, the one thing I'm gonna say, I don't think we should overthink it, but I do think we might wanna keep the pace moving through here. I think maximum we should be spending 3 hours per album. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
absolute
no, I
min
agree. I
yeah.
agree. I mean, if I mean, you could always cut, like little segments. I don't know how much cutting you do of
How
like
much how much cutting can you do when it's all gems? I mean, you can't just cut you know? It's like, what do you do? It's an all-star team, who do you cut?
Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs track by track. I am J. William Hall.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, providing context both historical and personal on some legendary bands. For our second season, we picked none other than pioneering indie rockers American Music Club.
Today on Backtracking, somewhere along the line, did we lose our nerve? Hell no, listeners, we're full of nerve, and we're gonna need it because we're about to backtrack American Music Club's major label debut, 1993's Mercury. It's an astonishing 14 tracks of classic Eitzel, polished to a high sheen by producer Mitchell Froom. But before we get to the sheen, there's a lot that happened behind the scenes. Are you ready, Dan?
I sure am, JW. As I'm sure our attentive listeners will remember, around the time that AMC started working on Everclear, they made a number of big changes. They said goodbye to longtime producer Tom Mallon, as well as manager Leslie Mallon. They also moved on from Frontier and Grifter, signing on with Delight Jenkins' Alias Records. Unfortunately, UK distributor Demon Records and longtime band champion Spike Hyde were casualties of the move to Alias. So as Everclear was readied for release, the band sought out new management to help navigate the next phase of their career. They decided on Wally Brill and Ross Schwartz, a highly experienced, professional, and well-connected duo they hoped would be able to turn positive reviews into record sales. The first thing Brill and Schwartz set out to do was unwind the various legal messes the band had left in their wake. Then they intended to leverage their industry connections to get the band signed to a major label. In fact, their preference would have been to make a deal that allowed the new label to release the completed but still unreleased Everclear. They called longtime associate and music industry legend Irving Azoff to get the ball rolling. The major label whining and dining began, and the band was delighted.
But Delight Jenkins was not. She had just signed AMC, had a great record ready to release, and she intended to release it on Alias Records. Resigned, Brill helped to secure Virgin for UK distribution and set up some big gigs for the band, including the Reading Festival, for their tour in support of Everclear. While the tour had high points, the real success for AMC once again proved to be critical. The plaudits were plentiful, but none were quite so dramatic as when Rolling Stone magazine declared Eitzel Songwriter of the Year, and Everclear one of the year's top 5 albums, along with REM's Out of Time, U2's Achtung Baby, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion, and Nirvana's Nevermind. The buzz around the band was becoming deafening, and despite that Everclear was a great album worthy of focus, all eyes were shifting toward the follow-up. After a bona fide bidding war, AMC ultimately signed with Warner Brothers imprint Reprise and set out to work on the album that would become a Mercury. After mixed results from early demo sessions led by Kevin Killen, who had worked on U2's War, there were two schools of thought. Bruce Caffin wanted to co-produce with the band based on the success of Everclear, but the label wanted a big name. Eitzel later claimed he wanted Caffin and resented that the new management didn't push back on Warner Brothers. Nonetheless, T-Bone Burnett, Gil Norton, and Mitchell Froom were interviewed, and Froom was ultimately selected. AMC were on the cusp of the big time.
So what else was poised for the big time in 1993? Dissident playwright Václav Havel is elected the first president of the Czech Republic, and an Islamic group undertakes the first World Trade Center bombing. The FBI and ATF begin their siege of David Koresh and the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, and just one day later, the Backstreet Boys are formed in Orlando, Florida. China performs its first nuclear weapons test. Andrew Wiles proves Fermat's last theorem, and id Software releases the video game Doom. Doom. J. William Hall, you remember Doom. Although I do have to say, in those days, those are our early, our days of having just graduated from college when we were working together, in addition to living together. Do you remember the game?
In the city of broad shoulders, Chicago.
That's right. That's right. Hog Butcher to the world. Do you remember the game we used to stay late in the office and play?
It wasn't Doom?
It was not Doom because we used Macintosh computers and Doom was not playable on a Macintosh.
Was it something similar, or like it was a first-person shooter kind of thing,
It
right?
was an arena shooter called Marathon. And we would play that for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, we'd work till late.
Yeah.
Go out to the bar.
Yeah.
And then come back to the office and play Marathon.
That's right. That's right. That's what they call work-life balance. That was called work-no-life balance. We just had no life.
Exactly.
Well,
Right.
It is great to be back here to talk about American Music Club's major label debut, Mercury.
Indeed.
Well said, as always. You know what? Economy of words is what you're all about, Jay William. So this is an album that clearly was an incredibly important milestone in the band's career. We are going to dig deep into it in the next 2 episodes. This episode will do side A. Next episode will do side B. But this was one of the most interesting experiences I've had backtracking in this season of the show. I went into the preparation for Mercury with one set of assumptions, one set of recollections about the album, and came out the other end with a very, very different impression of the album. And as you can hear, my dog George is very excited to get right into it.
George agrees. And I agree because I had a similar sort of it was a little bit of a rediscovery of this album for me. But we'll get into it track by track.
Yeah, that's right. Now, before we do it, though, we have a lot of housekeeping this week. I know this is not something that people absolutely love, but it is necessary. This is the cost of doing business, guys. This is what keeps the money in our pockets, allowing us to podcast for you. This stuff doesn't just come for free. So I'm going to blast through it as quickly as possible. We'll hit on all the little housekeeping items, and then we'll dig right in. Sound good, JW?
Yeah, housekeeping. You're talking about money flow. What's going on?
Of course there's no money flow. Of course there's no money flow. This is all just stuff that this is kind of, state of the union for the backtracking media empire, if you will. So the first thing I want to share, this is going to be exciting for some people, disappointing for others, but I just want to kind of surface it. I have deleted the backtracking Facebook account. Just a few weeks after creating the backtracking Facebook account, I have deleted it. I know, backtracking, we hardly knew ye. So I do not have a personal Facebook account. I have not had a personal Facebook account for many years, and I really have no interest in creating a new personal Facebook account. However, at the encouragement of listeners who said that the Firefly, the old email list for American Music Club, eventually converted into a Facebook group called Firefly. That's kind of apparently the hub of American Music Club discussion, although there are some other groups out there. It was suggested that we join that. So I created the backtracking Facebook account really solely to join that group. I requested admission into the group with that Facebook account and did not receive it. I then emailed one of the moderators explaining who I was, why I don't have a personal account, and that, we're responsible for the podcast that's being done on American Music Club, and didn't even receive a response. So I was never approved, didn't receive a response from the moderator, and nothing else really was happening on Facebook, with one exception that maybe can roll us into the next update that I want to talk about. It is I don't want to say it's bad news, but it's good news. It's not good news. It's not bad news yet, but it's definitely not optimistic. So,
Okay.
JW, as you know, I've reached out to all as many of the members of American Music Club as I could kind of track down.
Right.
I have to say that I did not have expectations that they would all, be in a big hurry to appear on the podcast. But I had some hope. I don't think there are too many other podcasts covering American Music Club. I thought they might be able to spare the time. So I thankfully received responses from Bruce Caffin. I received a response from Voodie. I received a response from Mr. Eitzel, and all of those responses were non-committal. And none of them have after I've reached back out, none of them have turned into ongoing discussion. So we're mostly being ghosted by the members of American Music Club right now. Listen, I don't blame them necessarily.
I would expect no less. That's perfect.
I mean, it really, in a lot of ways, it's perfect. It's like we've spent a lot of time going through this saying like, gosh, how did they're just such amazing songs, such a great band. How did they just not, how are people not talking about them every minute of every day, even now 40 years on? Well, maybe one of the reasons is that they can be a little bit prickly, perhaps. But listen, I'm still hopeful.
Elusive, mysterious.
However you want to put it. Now, the one person that I was kind of hopeful about that relates to the Facebook account is I did not reach out to Danny Pearson.
How could you not?
Well, I didn't have contact information for him.
Okay.
But when I joined the Facebook with the backtracking account, totally unsolicited, I got the only friend request I got in that account was from Danny Pearson, and I was like, "Oh, this is amazing!" He clearly knows about the thing. He's reached out. He's decided to become our Facebook friend. This must mean something, right? Right. Friends in need are friends indeed.
Facebook, there's no greater friend than a Facebook friend.
Am I
right?
That is right. That is right. You can count on me.
That is the true measure of how strong a friendship is.
Yeah. So anyway, I accepted the friend request, sent Danny a message. I think it was a very warm message. I received a response that was just a link to his Bandcamp page with zero other text in it. I took that to mean, hey, here's my Bandcamp page if you want to include it in the show or in the show notes, which I have. The Bandcamp page is in the show notes every week, so I encourage everyone to go check it out. And then I said, I responded to that saying, thanks, we'll add it to the show notes and talk about it in the podcast. We'd love to chat with you at some point if you have some time. No response to that. So I really just kind of feel like, you know what? Like, I don't need the Facebook account. It's not getting me anywhere. It's just one more piece of bullshit I got to deal with when, putting the pod together. So don't look for us on Facebook anymore. We're still on Reddit. We're still on X. We're still on Instagram. And email is really the thing that we like. So if you're out there and feel like you cannot get in touch with us, maybe you should look inside yourself.
We are Gen Xers.
That's right.
And I think the Gen X preferred mode of communication remains electronic mail.
That's right. I mean, listen, I would prefer it if you guys would write us a letter. If anybody wants to write us a letter, I will provide an address for you. It will be a P.O. box because I don't want fans showing up at my house, my many fans.
It's too much mail. It's too much mail to handle at your house.
I need to have professionals handle this fan mail. So, all right, but speaking of mail, I want to move on from that. Listen, I know you're out there, AMC folks. I suspect that at least some of you are listening or have listened. We really would love to have any of you on. We're huge fans, and we're not going to try to dig up dead bodies or anything, whatever the phrase is. We really just want to talk about the music a little bit. But listen, if If you're too busy, well, fair enough. I guess you're just too busy. Too busy for us.
Well, I want to reveal something to you.
Yeah.
We actually met Mark Eitzel, you and I together.
I know. Yes.
One time years ago, briefly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also met Voody, Danny, and Bruce a long time before that, briefly.
Yeah.
We're friendly people, but I also understand 100% why they might be kind of like, I don't know.
Well,
you know, the only shame of it is that then, you know, the world has to listen to us spew our perhaps incorrect assumptions or whatnot. But hey, you know,
we're living in a post-truth condition. We are deciding what the truth is by doing this podcast. So if you want to just let us decide what the history of this band, hey, go ahead. I'm happy to do it. We'll be talking about, you know, some really dark stuff next week when they formed a vicious street gang. But I want to get back to mail because we got quite a bit of mail that I at least want to acknowledge over the past couple of weeks. Okay, so Jay William, as not only a terrific collaborator and good friend, I know that you are also a voracious listener of season 1 of Backtracking.
yes.
You listen to every one of the 50 or so episodes at least once, usually more than once. Is that correct, JW?
Sort of on repeat, you know, since they were first, published.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you and any other listener of that season and this season would know, I have a little bit of a pet peeve around songs that have a fade out. I have a general personal rule that I just don't. I think that a good use of the fade out is exceptionally rare. But a listener named Chris sent an email, very gracious email, and he said, "Hey, listen, I've heard what you've said about fade outs, and I'd like for you to consider 2 songs that I think are terrific uses of the fade out." Okay, neither of these songs had I ever heard prior, which perhaps reveals the shallowness of my expertise in music that music fans should know. But here are the 2 songs. Jay William, you can tell me if you've heard either of them. Number 1, Stevie Wonder's song Golden Lady.
I am not familiar with that particular Stevie Wonder title, I have to say.
Okay, I am going to plug in a little clip of Stevie Wonder's Golden Lady here, so you can hear the fade. You can hear a little bit of the fade that Chris says is a good use of the fade. So why don't we just give it a quick listen? All right, there it is. Now, Jay William, my opinion on that fade, I'm going to be honest. Stevie Wonder, clearly a genius. When I listened to that fade for the first time, you want to know what I remember, what came to mind? Have you ever seen the Maya Rudolph sketch where she's playing like a singer? And she just sings a song that's like the lyrics are like key change. She's just like, key change, gonna do a key, and then it just keeps on changing keys. And it's like a very goofy song, but it's just kind of like a satire of, you know, these the overuse of the key change, you know, in pop music, right? This song reminds me of the Maya Rudolph sketch. I think there's too many key changes. It definitely key changes off into the distance. You know, the fades keep on going just like the key changes. But I'm sorry, Chris, this one did not change my mind. However,
now hold on a second here. I am not familiar with the song. I've never heard the song. Even though we said, let's go listen to it, we did not. And so I still have not heard the song. But just hearing your description with the title of the song, I'm like, ooh, that sounds interesting.
I encourage you to go listen to it. It's actually, it's kind of classic era, what I understand to be classic era Stevie Wonder, kind of 1970s Stevie Wonder. But that song didn't do it for me. However, the other song, which I think is a song I probably should know, but I am woefully lacking Brian Eno knowledge, is Brian Eno's song, Here Come the Warm Jets. Now, why don't we take a quick listen to that one as well? Okay, so Jay William, I am gonna concede to Chris that this is a great use of the fade out. It is a very Brian Eno-y song, right? And in a lot of ways, I feel like the song is this very interesting kind of like it almost plays out in reverse. It's almost like it's very atmospheric. The song kind of like starts off disassembled and then assembles itself and then fades out once assembled in a weird way. But I am going to say that, I will buy into the fade on this song. It's clearly part of what Eno is going for in this very experimental phase. So I will concede. That, I think, is an interesting fade out. It's clearly part of what the master plan was. That one does not feel to me like most fade outs, which is, I've said it many times, it's a band in a studio saying, well, shit, how are we going to end the song? And some person's just like, fade it out, dude. Let's just jam on that until the fade, and that's what I don't like.
Now, not to repeat our whole argument that we had in the earlier episode when you talked about your disdain for fade outs, and I defended the fade out, I think, in a broader range of uses. I understand what you're saying. There are fade outs that feel like cop outs.
Yes.
But I think that, fade outs can be used effectively in a variety of ways. I was thinking of a different Brian Eno song, which I think is called Stars, which is just like an ambient soundscape that sounds like the universe or whatever.
Yeah.
But, Talk, I think was the one I had mentioned in the first one. Like, I think they did a really good slow fade on, I forget if it was Spirit of Eden or Laughing, whatever. But anyway, Chris, thank you for your mail.
Listen, I really appreciated it. Although I didn't agree with both of his recommendations, I really appreciated being challenged by a listener on this and being introduced to two songs that I hadn't heard before. Okay, one other message that got sent across. A very lovely person named Ken sent us a message. What was interesting about Ken's message that I wanted to surface, also related to season 1, Ken wrote in and said, I cannot believe that you covered Rush in season 1, American Music Club in season 2. These are my two favorite bands. And I think there have been comments online from other people, and we have acknowledged this is a very strange transition to go from Rush to American Music Club. There is not a lot that is obviously connected between those two bands. But for Ken, he is definitely in a similar demographic to me in that he loves Rush and he loves AMC. So, of course, we asked him over email, who should be the band that we cover in season 3? He said that, hearing us discuss the possibility of covering Genesis in season 3 was very exciting to him. Now, we'll see whether Roth signs up for that. I do not think, Jay William, that you are much of a Genesis fan. I'm guessing, but
one of the first cassettes that I ever bought with my own money was Invisible Touch.
Was it really?
And that is like the extent of my Genesis knowledge.
Yeah.
So no, I would be a poor choice for a Genesis co-pilot.
Well, listen, I think that anyone out there who is a music fan, I would encourage them, regardless of their preconceptions about Genesis, I will make the argument that The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is one of the greatest rock albums ever. And certainly it is in contention, and I would probably say that it is the best concept album ever.
Whoa!
Yeah. Even you know, that's Over the Wall by Pink Floyd, in case you've heard of Pink Floyd, or 2112 by Rush. Which is really only kind of half of a concept album. But all right, enough of the prog rock stuff. Thank you, Ken, for the email. Thank you, Chris, for the email. And our last bit of housekeeping, this is a big one. Our friend, the incredibly helpful AMC archivist, Richard, sent us a message the other day. After having listened to the episode in which we covered Side A of United Kingdom. So he wanted to clarify one thing for us. As you might remember, with United Kingdom, parts of that album were recorded live at a gig at the Hotel Utah, recorded by Tom Mallon.
Which is in San Francisco.
That is correct. That is correct. It is in San Francisco.
Not in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is what I thought when I first read that as a teenager.
Yeah, no, it is in San Francisco. Bruce, he corrected us. Bruce Caffin did not play at the live shows. He overdubbed his parts onto those songs after the fact.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was a great correction. We really, really appreciate that. We do want to get this information as right as possible. So thank you, Richard, for that. The other thing that he sent across, which I loved, unfortunately, we've already covered Songs of Love Live, and the information got to us a little bit late. But he wanted to share the original complete set list of the show where Songs of Love Live was recorded. So I'm going to share that with you right now. Are you ready, JW?
Holy shit.
Okay. Here is the set list. And I'm assuming this is in the order in which the songs were played. Firefly, Gratitude Walks, Jesus Hands, Dead Part of You, Chanel No. 5, Why Won't You Stay, What the Pillar of Salt Held Up, Western Sky, Blue and Gray Shirt, Gary's Song, Miracle on 8th Street, Outside This Bar, Ex-Girlfriend, Royal Cafe, Room Above the Club, Last Harbor, Kathleen, Crab Walk, and Jenny. And then the next day at the offices of Demon Records, he did a little kind of live session for additional tracks on the album, 2 of which ended up on the final release. But here's the complete set of what was recorded there. Take Courage, Nothing, what is called Nothing Can Bring Me Down at this point, Dreamers of the Dream, Western Sky, and Goodbye to Love. So an amazingly exhaustive set list, terrific information to have, Richard. I can only hope that at some point in the future, there is a reissue of Songs of Love Live, including all of these songs. Because listen, what was on the record is a truly amazing, I think. And I'd love to have an extended version of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, so thank you, Richard, for all of that stuff.
The one thing that I noted, because I was trying to follow the track list of the actual released album versus what you were reading, that it was a number of songs that were destined for Everclear.
Yeah,
that got cut.
Yeah, that struck me as well. I was surprised at how many songs from Everclear are on there. I mean, there's a lot of Everclear songs in this set list, and just based on how good the performance of the other songs is, and based on how good those Everclear songs are, I bet that there are some real gems in there. I mean, gosh, I'd love to hear that version of Royal Cafe. There's a lot in there that I'd love to hear. So hopefully at some point, Richard, the Mr. Eitzel, the rest of the crew, whoever's involved, hopefully they can get a reissue of this out, because I'd love to hear it. Okay, so Jay William, that is it for housekeeping. How do you feel about it?
That was a thorough housekeeping. I feel exhausted.
I know. Well, now that we've cleaned house, it is time to dig into the basics of Mercury. It was released in March of 1993 on Warner Reprise, and Virgin did the European distribution. The runtime of this album, J. William Hall, 49 minutes and 37 seconds. This is a long album.
You cannot fit the whole thing on one side of a 90-minute cassette.
Is that true? Well, no, I guess that is true because I can divide the 90 by 2, and that's 45. Yeah.
I lived it, baby.
I know. So, well, we can get to this, but I mean, I think there are some interesting things about that length of the album. Now, before I get into the cover art, there is one little anecdote from the Sean Body book that I wanted to talk about a bit because I just thought it was too good not to talk about, but it really didn't, I think, warrant inclusion in our scripted open simply because we really had to focus on all of the label changes, management changes, all the kind of Rolling Stone stuff that happened during the very tumultuous time kind of between Everclear and Mercury. Around the time that AMC switched management and their new management was in conversations with major labels to get the band signed, a rumor began. And I don't remember off the top of my head how the rumor began, and I don't know whether they even talk about that in the book. But a rumor began in Hollywood among record labels that Eitzel had been approached by Bob Dylan to co-write his next album. And this
Really?
Yeah, and this rumor like got out there. And the management of AMC kind of knew that this was not the case, but didn't dissuade anyone from this rumor because it was like they were trying to gin up hype around the band for, you know, the new record contract. So I thought that was like really, really interesting that they kind of fed the fire of this weird Bob Dylan rumor.
Well, you know, one thing that's interesting to me is the thing about Eitzel being named by Rolling Stone magazine, you know, the top songwriter of the year for that year. It always struck me. I mean, it's bizarre on a lot of different levels, but the main reason is that by that time, Rolling Stone magazine was kind of like the mainstream industry standard. I mean, they still covered like alternative groups that got to be a certain size or whatever, but it's extremely strange because they're the ones that would be like, you know, Bob Dylan is our songwriter of the year, like 25 years after, you know,
Yeah.
like, you know, U2 put out the best rock record and, you know, last year. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, they're so out of touch. It's like this old crusty generation of voters. And so it's extremely odd that they would pick Eitzel, you know, to be the songwriter of the year, unless there was some, you know, when you talk about this rumor of him being tied to Bob Dylan, that would maybe get him in the ear of this like older, crusty establishment kind of crowd who are voting on these things.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is wild speculation.
Yeah,
man.
this is some wild speculation. That is definitely theory crafting there. I don't know. I mean, I do think it's probably worth noting for some of our younger listeners. Rolling Stone, I'm certain for them now is a complete non-factor. But there was a period of time when we were young, Jay William, I'm going to say in the, you know, 80s and 90s, where Rolling Stone retained this prestige for having been an incredibly culturally influential magazine during kind of the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah, it started as the counterculture. It started as counterculture.
Exactly.
But then it slowly drifted into becoming like mainstream, you know, kind of the bigged mainstream music publication out there.
Yeah, but by the time, you know, we were, you know, high school aged, certainly college aged, there were a number of other music magazines, which again, you got to remember, pre-internet, the magazines were kind of where we found out our information about bands and things like that. So, you know, there were a number of other magazines that were out there that were kind of intentionally counterculture to Rolling Stone's kind of mainstream culture, right? And it became, you know, as time went on deeper into the 90s, there was there was, even more of a sense of, Rolling Stone being very out of touch. It's like every time the Rolling Stones released an album, even if it was, Steel Wheels in like whatever, 1988 or 1990, they'd be like, oh, this is 5 stars. Honestly, I'm picking on Rolling Stone Steel Wheels. I'm not a Rolling Stones fan, and I don't know Steel Wheels at all. But
I think the Rolling Stones can take it. I think they'll absorb the criticism.
Listen, Mick, if you want to come on the pod and talk this out, I'm more than happy to host you. Clearly, we're not going to get Eitzel or Voodie or those guys, so we've got space in the schedule.
That's right.
But the Dylan thing goes further. After the later, they actually are invited by Dylan to open up for him in New York. So AMC opened 2 Bob Dylan shows in New York.
No shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they did. And there was conflict between, apparently Dylan kind of approached the band's management and said, hey, I want to jam with you guys on stage. I want to play something together. And Eitzel was like, no way. He's like, we don't want him on stage with us. He was kind of, dismissive of the idea. And so that didn't happen. But they opened these shows anyway. And Eitzel apparently made some kind of joke about one of Bob Dylan's songs while he was on stage. And I'm sure it was just a nervous, what do you say? You know what I mean? He's just trying to make some joke. He made a joke, but I guess it offended Bob Dylan. And so Dylan's management came down after the show and is like, all right, for the next show, you're not to say anything about Bob at all, about any of his music or anything. So it's just kind of another one of those weird AMC things where they just, they just get exactly right up to the absolute apex of rock stardom, and somehow or another it goes awry. You know what I mean?
That's really interesting because it's hard for me to imagine what a Bob Dylan AMC jam would sound like exactly. I feel like AMC is not a folk, I don't know. I mean, not to, it's fucking Bob Dylan. I'm sure he can jam with anyone, but I don't know. I actually understand why Eitzel would be I don't think that's a good idea. That's going to be weird,
I've got to say, I think if I was in the band and let's suppose, our band from college, which was a classic, were approached by Bob Dylan.
Could have been huge.
If you had said you know what, I don't think I want to play anything with Dylan, I think I probably would have throttled you. How could you say no to that? It's just you got to do it. There's some things in life you just have to do.
Yeah. I mean, well, like you said, it's sort of the self-destructive kind of DNA strand in there, the band's DNA that whenever there was a possibility of something that could skyrocket their career in some way, it goes awry.
Yeah.
So but hey, it increases my respect for Bob Dylan because he apparently recognized quality and was hey,
heck
so
yeah.
Hats off, Mr. Dylan. I'm sure my accolade will, you'll take note.
I think that Dylan also should be welcome onto the podcast if he has any interest and wants to weigh in on any of these issues.
Mr. Dylan, if you're out there, you are cordially invited. Maybe you want to talk about AMC. Come on.
I mean, listen, you know who else we could have? We could just have Timothy Chalamet on to talk about it. He can opine on Dylan and American Music Club, having been the actor.
He could do his Bob Dylan. He could do it as Bob Dylan.
He could. That's actually a terrific idea. Okay, so we've got some, but we'll get the production team on this. We'll get our bookers on it. We'll see if they have any better luck than I've been having. So, all right, enough of this nonsense. Mm-hmm. It's time to dig in. So the cover, Jay William, we are back to Bobby Neel Adams. It is a photograph that's on the cover of this album, a black and white photograph taken by Bobby Neal Adams. Of course, we remember Bobby Neal Adams because he provided the cover photos for The Restless Stranger,
California,
and that's it, I guess.
That's it.
What do you think about this cover, the entire package? How do you feel about it, JW?
So I have the CD of this that I bought, immediately when it came out. And while, I like the cover, like just as an image, because it's cool. It's Cambodia, right?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. I tried to figure out what that was, but I couldn't quite figure it out.
I think it's Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat, is it?
Right?
Okay.
I don't know why I think that. I'm pretty sure it is though. And so I think it's just like, Bobby Neal Adams was traveling and takes photos probably wherever he goes, and this was an image. However, while I really like the image, I think it's a strange choice for this album in particular, and AMC in general.
Yeah.
Because it's that weird juxtaposition of American music club, like as a major label debut.
Yeah.
The only thing that I will say is that I remember looking at it when it came out, and I thought like Mercury, which I love as an album title, but I was like, is this supposed to be like the building looks like it's melting?
Yeah.
Like it's on the planet Mercury, like, the building's melting or something. So I don't know. I mean, but it's a cool image, but, I'm not a fan. This is so nitpicky of the yellow color
really?
for the
Okay.
word Mercury. Yeah, I don't like the yellow, but other than that, good job. Good job, whoever put this cover together.
I will say I like the back cover of the CD substantially better than I like the front cover. I like the use of the yellow text for the track listing and the copyrights and all that kind of stuff. And I think personally I like the image that appears on the back cover a little bit better. I will say that my opinion here is I don't dislike this cover. I like the Bobby Neal Adams image. I think it's fine. I personally feel as though it's somehow a step backward from the really great Everclear cover. I don't know if this is a high, obviously like everything in here, this is highly subjective. But for some reason, I just kind of, I really like the style of the Everclear cover. That painting, and they go back to that for the next album, San Francisco. And this cover always kind of struck me as a little bit of an oddball in what I think of as kind of the second era of American Music Club. Perhaps the really anal part of me would like it better if the entire second era had similar covers. You know what I mean? And I know that probably in the moment when you're in the band, you don't know what your second era, you know what I mean? It's not like you're thinking that way, but somehow I would like to be able to look back and say like, oh, the painting cover era was kind of era 2. And, but be that as it may, I don't think it's a problematic cover, but it is not one of my faves, from their catalog. I would agree with you. I love the name of the album, though.
Yeah, I would generally agree with you. And then the thing about this whole package is it's very 1990s.
Yes.
Like especially when you get into the interior of it and you look at the way like the photos that they chose and especially the band photo. I mean, this is an example of like, suddenly this is a big label now. You're on a major and the package feels like a major label release of that time where they're kind of trying to present the band and, create an image, kind of thing. And so it's like the bands are in suits, they're starting with the hats, and there's some just kind of general photos of them kind of hanging out and stuff on the inside, which are all, just, I don't know. I guess it's sort of meant to kind of like, oh, you're getting to know the band, through this photo. But it's interesting because it's different, than their previous albums where there was a lot more mystery. I mean, I guess they always put a photo of the band on a lot of the albums, but this one feels like more.
This is going to be the most difficult topic, I think, for me to work my way through, because I have very complicated thoughts on the production of this album. And I think really we need to begin by talking about the choice of producer, the anecdotes that appear in the book about the band, and kind of use that as our way into what is kind of the substance of what do we think about the production. So it's discussed in here, and Caffin is quoted pretty candidly and I think quite kindly, but basically what happens is they get new management, they get the major label deal, they get a very large kind of advance, right? And Eitzel gets a large advance for publishing because he gets a new publishing deal at this point as well. So there's now a lot of money invested into this band there, by any measure. And so it is, I think in some ways understandable that the label would push for a well-known producer to work with the band because that's not something that has happened to date. They've never really had a well-known producer that they've worked with. So the way it's described in the book is that there's kind of two schools of thought. Caffin Caffin would like to produce the band, would produce the album with kind of the co-produce it with the band, right? And in retrospect, Eitzel claims that was his preference as well. However,
which would it would be a repeat of what they did for Everclear, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But in retrospect, Eitzel claims that was his preference. Now, their new management, Wally Brill specifically, is quoted in the book saying he does not remember Eitzel pushing for Caffin to produce the record, and he doesn't think that was Eitzel's preference at all. So he kind of disputes the memory, and apparently this dispute over the producer led to issues with the management in the future. So already with the new management, this has kind of put a wedge between them and the band. But there is a dispute about how this all went down. So there are three producers that are so anyway, the decision is made. How exactly it's made and who's in favor of it is a little bit unclear from the book, but the decision is made to put forward three different people to potentially produce the record. T-Bone Burnett, incredibly well-known producer, right? Incredibly well-known producer. He is not selected. It does not talk at all in the book about why he's not selected. The second producer that is put forward, I wanted to point out to you because I think there's a couple of kind of funny and interesting things about him. His name is Gil Norton.
Oh, yeah.
And so you know who Gil Norton is.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, he was an indie producer du jour. Like, he did a lot of, like, indie guitar bands, like Pixies, Echo and the Bunnymen. Those are the big two that I know, but I know that he did more than that. Like, he was a guy that brought a certain edgy, he was just good at producing those type of edgy guitar bands, which is a very different choice than T-Bone Burnett, who, is more like Americana, earthy, acoustic kind of, also a great producer. And, I'm sure his list of productions is a mile long with Grammys and whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, both of those guys would have been interesting choices.
So Gil Norton, when I read this, I thought that you would get a kick out of it. One of the bands listed here in the book that he produced was the Blue Aeroplanes.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, season 4 of Backjacking, Blue Aeroplanes.
Okay, but Gil Norton, I don't know, again, who's to say how real this is, but he is it's described that he is initially kind of the front runner. And he initially says that he wants to do it. Then he gets the demos that are recorded for Mercury. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing the quote that is in the book, but there is a quote in the book, but I'm going to paraphrase it. He says, essentially, these guys are taking the shit. They need to cheer the fuck up. And he pulls out of producing the record. So I guess he felt like the demos were too sad, too downbeat or whatever. And he decided he did not want to produce the record. And so Mitchell Froom is selected. Now, Mitchell Froom, you know, another notable producer from this time period with some credits that I think are bands that I know that you like, but you know, maybe most famously he is married to and produced Suzanne Vega kind of when Suzanne Vega was quite big.
Right.
And also Crowded House he produced.
Right.
We're going to come back to that Crowded House thing later, or I'm going to come back to it in some of my comments.
As will I.
Excellent. So, but Mitchell Froom is selected. Now, there is a lot of discussion in the book about Mitchell Froom being in a bad headspace when he is recording this album. He is going through a divorce from his first wife or one of his wives, I think before he married Suzanne Vega. Mitchell Froom is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but they kind of paint this backdrop of like Froom comes into this project in a negative headspace.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of, and I want to set this context before I talk about it, because some of this may have influenced my listening to the album. I'll admit that up front. But I think Bruce Caffin says it most kindly and I think accurately in the book. He says, and again, I'm paraphrasing a quote that's in the book, Froom is a great producer, but he makes Mitchell Froom records. If you know what I mean, right? And then they talk a little bit about how in this time there are certain producers that really kind of everything they produce turns into their own sound, and the band is a little bit ancillary to that. And, you know, I think that's not, maybe that was prominent during this era, but I think through time there are definitely lots of producers that you know, you could say that about, right?
Yeah.
But that is the criticism. The other criticism that in lots and lots of words they talk about, but I'm going to kind of try to distill it, is Froom ended up influencing the band to make what could have been, and many people wanted to be, kind of their breakthrough commercial record, like a little bit more straightforward production. He took it in a very strange direction that really was driven by him and was not driven so much by the band. And Eitzel like went along with it, but the rest of the band apparently was not real happy about it at all. But he, you know, he really just, he was kind of like driving this direction. And I think when we go through this album, there are certainly some songs on it where you're like, yeah, that just, it seems like that sound for the band, that direction for the band is coming from a little bit out of nowhere. And so I'm giving you all of this context as my way of beginning my issue with this. I've re-listened to this album. I've decided I really dislike the production. I used to like, I remember when I used to listen to AMC all the time, before we backtracked the whole thing, I really kind of like this album, right? And I still kind of like this album, but I came away from all of my re-listens with this feeling that, gosh, the underlying material is mostly amazing, and it's mostly been completely screwed up by the producer.
That's an interesting take, because I had a lot of trepidation going into this album, because this was the point in my relationship with AMC where my obsession started to fade a little bit at this point. And it wasn't, I don't know what it was exactly. I think it was just where I was in my life or whatever, you know, like I'd been obsessed with AMC for however many years. This album came out, it's their major label debut. And I think that I was like mildly disappointed because it sounded slick like, or slicker than they had sounded before. This is an album that sort of takes a step into a more like, I think they called it AOR radio, adult oriented radio back in the day, which is a space that like Crowded House and, I don't know, like Suzanne Vega, like I think those type of artists were in that space. And I love some of that stuff that was in that space. But for AMC, this kind of, however, so this was my impression of the album. I didn't become as obsessed with this album on first, exposure to it back in the day.
Yeah.
And honestly, like I of all the AMC albums, like this is the one I've heard the least probably since, the 90s. Yeah. Because I was more like a early AMC guy or whatever. Yeah. And but listening to this album the last couple of weeks as I've been kind of prepping, for this episode, I was kind of struck by like some of Eitzel's greatest songs, I think might be on this album.
Yeah.
And I don't know
I agree with
like
that.
song for song, I like the album as well as a couple of their other albums, but I had kind of forgotten like how powerful, some of the songs on this album are. And I think the production is part of that, like, so it's like, I think Froom, he got it right, on here and there. And there were definitely things that pushed their sound forward. It pushed it in a different direction. It was something they hadn't done before. So I admire that. But I think that quote from Caffin about like, Mitchell Froom makes Mitchell Froom sounding albums. It's true. Like this sounds akin to like a Crowded House kind of sound. Yeah. But the songs are a lot darker.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you said that. This is totally one of my comments in some specific songs that I want to hit on, but I completely agree with what you've just said. Somehow or another, I feel as though the imposition of some of these, what I'm going to just say are froomy things, which in many places I feel are very evocative of like what you hear on a Crowded House record. I love like so many Crowded House songs, and generally think that I haven't like really deeply listened, but I never felt it as though the production was anything but totally fine. It really feels like he kind of like did the same production things, but it just somehow, some great songwriting in Crowded House as well, but the songwriting is fundamentally different and not as dark. And when you put that kind of production approach against the backdrop of some of these quite dark songs, it feels really odd to me. Now, not everywhere, right? Like there are some songs on this that we'll talk about that I'll talk about, and I'll make the argument that he captures, I think, parts of the band better than any other producer to date. I think them playing like rock, kind of garagey rock, I think he's the first producer that actually like got it, really. But it's mostly not a garagey rock album. You know what I mean? Most of these songs just, it seems to me, don't lend themselves in that direction. And so I had some real issues with it. And I think there are a couple of examples of songs in here where the production, and the arrangement in the production, I don't know how much of this we can attribute to Mitchell Froom, but I think it's safe given what's been said in the book and what we've listened to from the band to date. I think it's safe to say he had a pretty heavy hand in it. I think in a couple of cases, he's committed malpractice, right? I mean, I actually think, I think, I don't want to spoil it, but I think that what Godzilla Said to God is absolute production malpractice, because we have the Songs of Love live version of that to hear what it is, without a doubt one of Eitzel's most beautiful compositions, and it can just crush you, just him and a guitar. And they turned it into this very weird we'll go into it, but I just think it just
Yeah.
stripped it of all of the beauty, which is saying a lot because it is an immensely beautiful song.
Yeah, it's hit and miss. We'll get into the hits and the misses, but like some of the production is perfect or really kind of takes them in a different direction in a great way, and then there's some that's a little too whimsical or kind of, I don't know, something that doesn't jibe with the tone, of the lyrics. Exactly.
You know what? I'm gonna beat this up a little bit more, but I really, this is something that I really struggled with and kind of like ended up fixating on. The album to me on these re-listens feels like Yankee Hotel Foxtrot if it didn't pull it off. If you go back and think about the history of Wilco a little bit, and you think about the records before Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, obviously this era is captured incredibly beautifully in the Sam Jones documentary, I'm Trying to Break Your Heart. Everyone should go out and watch that. One of the best rock music documentaries ever, in my opinion. But there is a huge shift in what the band is doing, and it is mostly a shift that happens in the studio through the production of that album, right? And if they didn't thread the needle just perfectly on the execution of what it is they were going for, which I think they pretty much did on that album, it really would have felt like a mess. And I feel like Mitchell Froom was kind of trying to do almost a Yankee Hotel Foxtrot to American Music Club, and it just fell on its face in a couple of spots. A couple spots. I don't think the whole thing is a disaster, but I think there are a couple of spots that were really, it just did not work.
Yeah. It's that whole like taking a song, deconstructing it, reconstructing it as something different or whatever, and some, couple spots on this album, it didn't feel, like not quite right or whatever. Anyway, but upon re-listen, I'm excited to talk about this album track by track because I hadn't heard it. I hadn't really listened to the whole thing in a long time. And there were unexpected pleasures.
There are definitely unexpected pleasures, but there was some pain as well. I think for me, one of the things that that highlighted this for me is, again, it's a benefit of backtracking. Like when you listen to these albums in detail, in sequence, in chronological sequence, you really kind of appreciate that evolution. And I think what they hit on with Everclear is a very consistent sound that I think worked equally well across all of the songs on the album, right? And it was definitely an evolution for the band, but it was in my mind a positive evolution, and it's pretty coherent. I actually think it also is aged really well. When you go into this album, I think it is less consistent production across the songs. There's some great production, in my opinion, and some that's not as good. And the most interesting production choices, to me, felt dated. It really felt like it locked it to this specific era. I think of as like when, we were talking about the top 5 albums of the, think about REM Out of Time. It really kind of, I'm like, oh my gosh, it just feels very of that moment. Yeah. Right.
I agree. But, like in defense of Mitchell Froom, his job coming into this album, this was their major label debut. His job was to make them as palatable to as wide an audience as he could. And, it's like he did that, but the album is also pretty fucking weird compared to
it is.
A lot of what was, mainstream or like, adult alternative or whatever, at the time. So let's get into it. Come on.
All right. So Jay William, let's just get to it. I can tell you are eager to dig into some backtracking. So why don't we set sail on side A? The first song is Gratitude Walks. It is 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Let's give it a listen.
Why don't you be good for something and draw down the shade on a sign that's up all night night shivering on a sun sat up all night afraid. One that shines on the oasis that leads a man to drink. Drunk on the kind of applause that gets louder the lower you sink. Gratitude walks. Gratitude walks. Gratitude walks on 6th Street.
Ah, there it is. There it is. What an opener. Do you want to dig right into these lyrics?
The lyrically, it's dense. Okay, and so this is something about Eitzel's lyrics. It's like, rarely are they so straightforward that upon first listen, it's like, oh, I understand what he's talking about. The whole concept of gratitude walking.
Yeah.
And, I think it's hard to parse exactly what it means, but I do know that 6th Street in San Francisco,
Yeah.
is a distressed corridor. It's I don't know what all is going on there, but I know that is like, a challenging stretch of San Francisco, and so Eitzel, is returning to the themes and the people that he's written about, especially on the previous album Everclear,
Yeah.
Prostitutes, junkies. Am I incorrect?
I mean, this one, I would agree. I found this one to be, I think the lyrics are very powerful, but it is not necessarily entirely easy to ascertain what he's talking about. One thing that I do think is worth discussing is that Eitzel stopped drinking for some period of time following Everclear. And so I don't know when this song was written, but I will say that my interpretation of the first verse of this song, which I'll just read really quickly, is that it is a verse discussing essentially alcohol withdrawals or some kind of withdrawals. And I believe this is kind of very much written in the first person. So why don't you be good for something and draw down the shade? Okay? So he's talking to some other person. Draw down the shade on a sun that sat up all night shivering. Okay? Who sits up all night shivering? Maybe someone who's in withdrawals. On a sun that sat up all night afraid. One that shines on the oasis that leads a man to drink. Okay? So I just kind of feel like he's trying to like block out, get through this withdrawal, this temptation to drink now that the sun is back up after a long night of, whatever. And then this line, drunk on the kind of applause that gets louder the lower you sink, I think is a very... It could be, and my interpretation is that's a very personal struggle for Eitzel, because at this point he's really become this character. Early on in the career, we talked about, he's a fan of Bukowski, and maybe he's kind of like writing from this place and exploring this place, and somehow romanticizes this like life in a bar and the life of a barfly. But there is this question that I think one would logically ask, which is, at what point do you become a prisoner of that archetype? He's now a well-known enough guy, and people have this expectation. He's going to write about drinking. He's going to be drunk on stage. He's going to exist in a bar. And maybe that isn't really the full story of who he is, but it is his vocation in some ways. And that's a challenging kind of place to be. So that first verse for me, that was my interpretation.
So kind of a commentary on where he's at in his life, intertwining both the sort of alcohol and being sort of the drunk court jester.
Yeah.
And his career being an entertainer in the spotlight, and that's fueled a lot of it. And as he's gotten more successful, he's gotten more miserable, on some level.
Yeah.
I can see that. So now, what is your interpretation of the chorus? Gratitude walks on 6th Street. Like, what do you think that means?
I don't have an answer to that. I just, there are certain parts, this happens to me pretty frequently when I try to really dig into these lyrics. There are parts of it that evoke something very clear for me. And then there are other parts that I just can't quite, they don't really evoke anything for me, or I can't quite put my finger on it. But this was one of those songs where I like kind of the first verse, just something crystallized in my head when I reacted to it that I really have a difficult time kind of getting away from. And the rest of the lyrics, nothing really crystallized for me, and so I just kind of ignored it. And like that first verse is my interpretation of what the song is about. Obviously, it could be totally wrong, but that was my takeaway.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting about this song, especially as the first song on the major label debut, is that on most of their albums, Big Night on Engine, Here They Roll Down on United Kingdom, Why Won't They Stay? This is in that tradition. And so my assumption is that the record company was like, all right, look, like, there's going to be audience out there. They're going to be hearing these guys for the first time. We got to give them, the AMC experience right up front, And so it was like, oh, this is sort of like the Why Won't You Stay sort of experience. The opener is this moody, atmospheric, mysterious kind of thing. But, I think in this case, the lyrics are so kind of hard. It's hard to grasp onto any one thing. Like even if you think Why Won't You Stay is just a straight up, like romantic love song.
Yeah.
It sounds like that. So like you have the chord, you have the hook or whatever. And this one I feel is a little more airy, a little more kind of hard to kind of grasp onto something solid here. But I mean, it's a beautiful atmosphere,
Yeah, this is, I think, in my mind, one of the stronger songs on the album. I'm not going to it's one of the stronger tracks on the album. I don't think the songwriting here is as good as some of the other amazing, amazing songs that appear on this album. But I actually think as a complete package, this is one of my favorites. And there are a couple of things. I felt the same way. I definitely had this weird sense of similarity with Why Won't You Stay? But there is something a little bit ephemeral that's interesting about this one. It has a little bit of sauce on it that I actually really like. This was one of the songs, I spent a lot of time when we were talking about the production, basically shitting on the production or expressing concerns about the production. I really like the production on this song in particular. I think it's really good. One of the moments that I felt like I wanted to bring up with you is the bridge. You've commented multiple times about how something that I thought was really insightful and I had never really kind of noticed is that AMC has in the past done a lot of these bridges where like the whole song kind of comes down in the bridge, which isn't necessarily something that, is super common. This happens in the bridge here, in the first part of the bridge, but the second half of the bridge, it really like takes off.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing swell. There's this awesome moment of, I think it's Voodie just making this super distorted kind of noise that like builds that swell. I just love the bridge in this song. And I think the production in and around here is this example of like Froom and the band moving incrementally in a direction beyond Everclear, but it still, I think, fits within the recipe that the band got right on Everclear, which is essentially the band needs to be an orchestra that swells emotion behind Eitzel and his songs. You know what I mean? Like that really is the most effective, existence for this band overall, in my opinion. So I like this song. I thought this was really well executed. I think it's a good opener. I agree. I think it's a little bit tougher to put your finger on than Why Won't You Stay, but I still think it's a terrific song.
I was trying to look up who played piano on this song, because the piano is very prominent in this song, which is sort of a new ish. I mean, there was some piano on United Kingdom on a couple tunes of Charlie Gillingham, but I don't think it's Charlie Gillingham here. I wonder if it's Mitchell.
It is Mitchell Froom. So this is discussed in the book as well. I was going to talk about it in the production section, but I got the feeling that, you know, you wanted to move on a little bit. But there was apparently some conflict between Caffin and Froom, because Froom basically came in and did all this keyboard stuff because he's a keyboardist. He eventually became the keyboardist for Crowded House, by the way.
Yeah, I was looking up his background, and like, yeah, he was a keyboard guy, and yeah, so it makes sense.
So he came in and did all this keyboard stuff, and kind of like, there is not much pedal steel on this. And Caffin, it's related in the book that there are a lot of tracks where he kind of like went to Caffin and said, I don't really know that there's anything for you to do on this song, you know? And so it really feels as though this, again, everyone has a different preference on like what elements of AMC you like, but I personally really think that Caffin and the way they introduced pedal steel into this very kind of washy, atmospheric soundscape thing that they did on Everclear was like, that was the key that unlocked kind of AMC. And he just kind of took that keystone out of the structure, and in some cases it just kind of fell down. I don't think this is one of the cases, but to get back to who played keyboards, it was Froom, and he definitely was a keyboard advocate across this album.
Yeah, it lends a certain loungy kind of element to a lot of the songs on the album that I think is I guess Why Won't You Stay had sort of a loungy kind of vibe to it as well. But it's really effective on certain songs, because this is where Eitzel's starting to step into kind of like the big
crooner,
torch singer, crooner, like he's starting to inhabit that more. And so that kind of like backdrop serves, some of these songs really well. But, like it also sort of takes it a notch into adult alternative or territory, and I don't know if that's where they wanted to be.
Yeah.
Certainly I can see why Caffin would have some issues, because the pedal steel is very downplayed overall on this album, given how prominent it was prior.
Yeah, agreed. All right, are you ready to move on to track 2? Yeah. Okay. So track 2 is If I Had a Hammer. It is 3 minutes and 36 seconds. Why don't we give it a quick listen? All right, so the lyrics on this, so many memorable and beautiful lyrics in here. The love cry of the traveling man goes, no one knows who I am, is a line that will remain etched in my brain for my entire life. I think it's just an interesting, odd, and really like kind of inviting first line for this song. It like I listened to that line and I'm like, God, I'm not entirely sure where he's going with this, but like I want to hear more. You know what I mean? I want to know where it's like a great first line of a novel that really, can really set you off on this. I think this is a great first line of this song. I also just think that there's this thing that he's now done a few times where there's symmetry between the first lines and the last lines in the song, and I love that. He does it here. I fucking love it. I just think it's beautiful. And then the chorus lyric is so simple but memorable and emotionally evocative. This is maybe I'm almost there. I love that line, but there's so much to talk about in and around that line, I think emotionally as we get into the music. But I'll stop. Do you want to talk at all about the lyrics? Because I know that I've monopolized that conversation so far.
Well, yeah, my interpretation was basically just starting with the love cry of the traveling man. I thought was like, okay, he's talking about being on the road,
Yeah.
in the band,
Yeah.
and it gets puzzling in a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the whole I'm as priceless as a brass ring that lost the heat from your hand. Like, that's a complicated sort of like line to kind of parse and try to figure out, like, okay, what is he talking, you know? So it's like, you know, he was the brass ring, but somebody let go of the brass ring, and now it's losing its heat. Like, I don't know if he's commenting on his career in the music industry or the band, you know, like, but the traveling man thing makes me think, yeah, it's something about, you know, where he's at in his life and career.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's some really, really interesting and evocative lines in here. Another one of my favorites is you say, just get me back to the leper colony, because that's where you left my heart. Again, there's like these moments of humor in his writing that I think are interesting. I really like the lyrics to this, but I don't quite have a sense of like, oh, this is what he's specifically talking about. What was most interesting to me about this song on my re-listens is, okay, I was really conflicted about it, because this song comes in and it is undeniably a very different production approach for the band. And it's interesting. You know, you're hearing a very different American Music Club on this song, a more kind of bouncy, upbeat feel, right?
Yeah.
It's not unappealing, right? And I think that one of the most memorable parts of this song is the production on the choruses, right? That like beautiful Danny harmony in the background, and that really sing-alongable kind of maybe I'm almost there. I love it. It's just like a really, really memorable, beautiful part of this song. And it's like when you listen to it, if you just listen to those words in the chorus and the music, you're like, this is like very optimistic. This is an incredibly optimistic sentiment, both musically and lyrically, for the band. However, these are not optimistic lyrics. When you read that lyric within the context of the rest of the lyrics, he's not talking about maybe I'm almost to this great destination that I'm hoping to get to. He's basically saying maybe I am already at rock bottom, right? That's what he's expressing. You know, he is expressing this sense that like, wow, maybe I've finally hit rock bottom and it's not going to get any worse from here, which is perhaps the most pessimistic sentiment that you can imagine. And I mean, it just really confounded me in a way that I think I ended up feeling on some of the other tracks on this album.
The thing that struck me on this one was the very start of the song.
Yeah.
It feels almost like low energy.
Yeah.
Where it just sort of like kind of starts, and it's not like anyway, this song led me to think to myself, if I were to order the tracks on this album into the idealized J. William Hall version of this album, I would not have put this track as track 2. Just because coming out of Gratitude Walks, it's like, you know, on Everclear, they hit you with Rise was the second song. And I feel like they needed something a little harder hitting, you know, in this second position. And this one just kind of tiptoes in.
Yeah.
You know? But I mean, it does reach some really interesting, I mean, it's like on the one hand, the song sounds a little too tame.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's got all these strange bridges and side sections, and it does some kind of crazy stuff. Like Voodie, has some like crazy squalling like at different parts. And so it's like it's quote unquote interesting. Like, but I don't know, like, what is the song about? So now you have two songs in a row where it's a little bit like, I have no idea what they're talking about,
Yeah, I like this song. I think the song itself, the underlying song, is really quite lovely, right? But I came away from that, and I think it's similar. Like, the part of this song where, it gets it. I don't know if I've reached the bottom yet, but and it like really like there's some great kind of more rockin' stuff in there, and I think the feel of that stuff musically feels really good. So I think kind of where I'm like landing on the production on this album and in this song is like his approach to the more rocky rock songs. I think I like, but I feel like some of the more naturally downbeat stuff, he tries to move away from like this Everclear United Kingdom kind of slowcore, atmospheric slowcore stuff, and it ends up weirdly dissonantly jangly. It feels like it just feels very dated and does feel to me very REM somehow. You know what I mean? It feels like they're wearing somebody else's clothes in those moments, and I think part of this song feels that way to me.
Yeah, it feels a little bit fussed over and a little bit whimsical at times, like certain instrument choices and stuff that are, something new, something different. Yeah, it's a mismatch somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, this is really the first song on the album where I started to kind of just feel like, I'm not quite sure. All right, so I don't know. Do you want to move on to Challenger?
Track 3.
Okay, track 3. Track 3, Challenger, 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Why don't we just give it a real quick listen?
In my seat over the wing. Well, I'm the happiest hot potato on the plane. Yeah, I'm looking, it's beautiful. I think I wanna go and live out there right now. Oh, stewardess, can you fix me? Oh, stewardess, can you fix me? Some Mercury.
Okay. Now, dark lyrics here. Perhaps the darkest lyrics on the album, but definitely a very dark title. Assuming the reference is the reference that I thought it was. J. William, what do you think? And do you know what reference I'm thinking of?
I don't know what you're thinking, but here's what I'm thinking. It sounds like he's on a plane, and maybe he's wasted on a plane. He's, and that's my interpretation of the lyrics.
Yeah. I think that's
wasted on a plane.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's pretty imagistic, and I think it's imagistic, and I think it's he's saying some things that are pretty. They seem to be quite clear and descriptive of a specific situation, which is he's in a plane flying towards Detroit or away from Detroit. He wants a drink very badly, or the character of these lyrics wants a drink very badly, and is basically begging the stewardess to give him a drink. And he just, for some reason, he's really unhappy with where he's going or where he's been. Right?
Apparently Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit, and who can blame him? Detroit is not what it used to be. Now the name Challenger, though, really not a word that's used over the course of the entire song, does not seem to have any direct connection. My interpretation is Challenger, this is like a specific reference to the Challenger space shuttle disaster when the Challenger blew up.
Yes.
And so I think this is kind of like Challenger was somehow a reference to, I'm on this plane and my life is blowing up. The situation is blowing up. It is a Challenger level disaster to me personally. That was kind of the way I thought about it. And I was like, gosh, that is really some dark stuff right there.
Yeah, for sure. And this song, you know, like musically coming after the first two, you know, it's like on the one hand, we're sitting here saying, oh, Mitchell Froom, and it sounds too slick and it sounds too,
yeah.
But this song sounds apocalyptic, you know, like compared the production of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's very full on, like right from the get go, like very busy.
Yeah.
Noisy. There's, you know, some really kind of like, you know, way off kilter guitar happening, and just, you know, it's crazy. It's a crazy song.
Yeah, I know, but you know what? Like this is why I feel so conflicted about this album and the production of this album specifically. I love the production of this song. I feel like the kind of messy, punky barroom rock that the band has done many times over the course of the career and the albums that we've covered to date. Frequently, I think that my criticism is I don't think that those songs work on the albums. And I think it's because they just couldn't quite figure out a way to capture the vibe that you talk about must have been the vibe live. They didn't figure out a way to capture it appropriately on record. I think this song perfectly captures that vibe. I love the way this song is produced. And I can imagine Mitchell Froom's production of like Art of Love, Gary's song, Crab Walk. I can imagine that working really, really well. So as much as I'm kind of saying I have issues with the production, I think there are moments, and this is one of them, where I think he gets the band better than any of the other producers to date on a certain kind of song.
This is certainly a production that you would not hear on a Crowded House album.
Yeah.
I will give him that, you know. Yeah, the other note that I have on this is I noticed that Danny's bass playing on the last two
Hallelujah.
songs have been very different. It's this very very rubbery, like, you know, it doesn't sound like, because, you know, I mean, not all of his bass parts are this or that, but like he comes from more of a country western, you know, folk kind of style, and this is not that. This is like, it's like he's got some rubber going on there.
No, I mean, I had the exact same comment. You listen to the third verse of this song. I think the bass playing is awesome, and it is not a style of bass playing we've heard to date. I also think that the bass is much higher in the mix on this album across the board than it is on any of the albums to date. So for some reason, bass, I think, becomes kind of a star player on this album, and I would argue third verse of this song is definitely one of those high points. I two other comments on this one that I just want to, small comments that I just want to make. We've talked about fade outs already in this episode. I love that this song is allowed to deteriorate rather than just fade out. I love the end of that. I love how it just kind of, you know, falls apart at the end. I just think it's a perfect way to end this kind of song. Last comment, production, like a quibble that I've got. There is so much sleigh bell and tambourine on this album, and it is so Crowded House to me that I cannot get it out of my head now. But like sleigh bells, you know, are used on a lot of songs on this album, and it's not an unheard of choice for like rock bands, certainly. I mean, there are, you know, it's not totally uncommon, but it's not super common, and it's definitely a choice. It is like a strong choice to put sleigh bells on something, but there is sleigh bells and tambourine all over this.
One of the notes that I made about this album is that they clearly spent a lot of the production budget on auxiliary percussion, because there is like auxiliary percussion all over this album. And I don't know if that was a Froom thing or what, because the one thing that we haven't really mentioned is that new drummer in the band.
Yes.
For this album.
Yeah, and
Tim Mooney.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know how much of this to attribute to him versus to Mitchell Froom, but there is definitely a lot of unusual production or percussion used on this album. The other thing, though, that I would say is, and this is, this is probably a real kind of drummer comment that most people won't care about, but I really liked the way the drums sound, the way the drums, like the drum set, was recorded on this album, and it's an unusual sound. Like if you listen to the snare on this album, it has a very like wide open, super live sound, which is not something that you hear all that much. And I personally usually don't like a super, super live, really resonant, really open snare sound, but it works so well, I think, on this record. I really like it. I mean, there is no question, Jay William, you've hit on an important point. Mooney, new drummer, and there's definitely a different style of drumming happening here. Whether that's Mooney, whether it's Mitchell Froom, or whether it's both of them, it's interesting and it's different.
I agree with you. The snare, that snare drum sound in particular, and I can't decide. I think Froom had something to do with it, because I feel like I heard that sound on like Crowded House. I think that's like part of his kind of like sound, and it does work. It does work well at times, but there were definitely points in the album where I was like noticing the percussion and not like necessarily in a great way,
Yeah.
But anywho.
All right, so why don't we move on? We've got a lot to cover. So why don't we move on to I've Been a Mess? 4 minutes and 25 seconds. Why don't we just dig right down into it?
Just how pale I get without you. I've been a mess since you've been gone.
Okay, Jay William, I love the lyrics for this one. I think there's some really interesting stuff happening here. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to just hit on the first of them. So I think the Lazarus metaphor that starts this is just awesome. I just think it's so interesting. It's such an interesting, unexpected way to get into the overall feel and I think message of this song. For those playing along at home, I'm assuming this is a reference to Lazarus of Bethany, Jay William, who of course is raised from the dead by Jesus in, I think it's the book of John. I'm not certain. I am not a theologian, but I'm pretty sure that's where that little story shows up. And essentially, he's kind of saying Lazarus. I love Lazarus wasn't grateful for a second when there's this like kind of like it's almost funny, right? You imagine this kind of biblical character being raised from the dead and then being like, "Fuck, why'd you do that?" I was kind of happy not being alive. And then that next line, for another chance to watch his chances fade like the dawn, I just think is so beautiful. And that is like so classically Eitzel.
I feel like this song is a crystallization of the greatness of Eitzel in one song.
Oh, really? Wow. That is saying a lot, but go on.
And that is not an opinion that I held prior to backtracking this album.
Really?
It is only upon, because like I remember the opening of the song, and the opening is really striking because that is, I believe, a dulcimer. Don't come at me if it's not a dulcimer, people, but it sounds like a dulcimer, which is an instrument, it's an old Appalachian folk instrument kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not something that they have used, to my knowledge, previously. And this is like, it's just dulcimer and voice.
Yeah.
And his voice conveys so much pain immediately. There's something about the quality of his voice just as he kind of, mutters Lazarus, And I am not a theologian either, but I am really good at Wikipedia. And so I went reading about Lazarus and just kind of unpacking this metaphor that he's building here.
Yeah.
About like, Lazarus was resurrected and he was probably pissed when he was, because he was like, fuck, like I was dead and at least I didn't have to feel the pain that now I'm going to have to feel again. And then he, works it into what sounds like and I don't know whether it's a romantic thing, it's an unrequited love or something that you desire, and he's talking about hope and desire, a lot in this song. And it's like, you had the hope and then it died and you were at peace, but now it's back and you're like, fuck, like I wish I didn't feel that again because I'm going to be disappointed again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think I completely agree with you. I think that the lyrics specifically here are just classic Eitzel. They somehow managed to capture this weird mix of things that I think is characteristic of him throughout kind of the catalog. It's simultaneously totally overwrought, very poetic, extremely cynical, and also just kind of plain sad. But then, the verses are a little bit kind of like, coming from a strange angle. You're not really sure kind of where it's going to go. But then it goes into this chorus that's just a super classic pop song, lyrical sentiment, and chorus. I've been a mess since you've been gone. You know what I mean? That is like a sentiment that exact line has probably appeared in 100 different pop and country songs, right? But like somehow the way that he combines all of these things is just completely unique and really, really beautiful. And, I will definitely agree with you that I think lyrically this is a real classic. Now, the music, Jay William, I want to find out how you feel about this music. I think that this song is kind of Eitzel getting into that crooner mode that we talked about a little bit before, but I think this is really the first big moment of that on the album.
This song is so interesting because I think exactly what you said. You're combining these really unusual verses and images and metaphor, and then this really simple classic kind of chorus. But it's like, this is a big croony, show-stopping kind of thing that I could hear like Frank Sinatra, kind of like delivering this kind of thing. And Eitzel kills it, like I think this is one of his greatest captured vocal performances on any AMC album.
Wow.
And I think that the production and the choices that they made are perfect, honestly. Like I don't see any flaw in the production on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think these are very, very strong words. I think this is super interesting, Jay William. I will say this is another song where the bass was one of the things that I noted. It really swings. The bass on this song just swings, you know what I mean? And it's so much more forward in the mix than on any of the previous albums. So I found myself thinking like, gosh, is the bass always this interesting and kind of unexpected on the rest of the albums, but it's just buried a little bit in the mix so I don't notice it? Or is his approach to playing just really different here?
Yeah, he has he's doing sort of like these jazz scale kind of things, at different points. But yeah, I mean, I think that's different, but it serves the song perfectly. And, this is the one song on the album where you can definitely hear the pedal steel poke through here and there. It's not all over the track, but it just pops in to sort of punctuate in the chorus, like after he says, "I've been a mess since you've been gone," and then a little pedal steel, And I think it's super effective. It ties them to their old sound, but it also presents them in kind of a new way that's really kind of like a wow moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, it sounds like we're both saying that this is one of the stronger tracks so far. And it sounds to me like you're saying this is going to be a contender for JW's Tournament of Champions.
Only those who listen to the very end of the next episode will find out.
Okay. All right. So you want to move on to Hollywood 4592?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we do that? It is 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Hollywood, April 5th, 1992. Let's go.
My revenge against the world is to believe everything you say, balanced as you are on a pile of empty bottles. And even when the world has taken all your defenses away, and there's no way that you can be true. And I believe you.
Okay, so Jay William, the first thing that I neglected to do is make a note on what the significance of Hollywood April 5th, 1992 is.
Right.
What the significance of that date is.
Do you have a way to know? Oh, do you mean just like in the headlines, like what was going on that day?
No. I mean, I'm assuming it's a pretty specific date. It's got to be a pretty specific reference. I do somehow in the back of my mind rattling around have a recollection of a story of Mark Eitzel going to a Hollywood party where he, with, a bunch of kind of famous people, right as he's kind of going through the Rolling Stone thing and everything, and feeling awkward there. And it is possible that anecdote, which I believe appears in the Sean Body book, was in reference and explanation to that is what happened on April 5th, 1992, but do not quote me on it. I am very possibly conflating a number of things.
Well, I just Googled what happened on April 5th, 1992.
Yeah.
And I have a new theory about what I think the song is about. I believe it is about what happened that day, which is the Peruvian president, Alberto Fujimori, dissolved the Peruvian Congress and other government branches in a self-coup.
Wow. A self-coup.
I kid. I think that you're correct. I mean, the way I read the lyrics was that he's in a situation where he's talking with sort of a Hollywood type, like a phony kind of whatever, and that they're very drunk and they're just spinning a line of bullshit, and his his way of dealing with it is to pretend that he believes everything that they're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Hopefully somebody will send something in. I'm probably conflating a number of stories. I will say, though, about these lyrics, Jay William, my revenge against the world is to believe everything you say, balanced as you are on a pile of empty bottles, is I've probably said this a few times. It is one of my all-time favorite Eitzel lyrics. I just think it's such
all time,
and one of my all-time favorite lyrics. I think it is simultaneously strange, evocative, kind of it's just beautiful. I had a slightly different interpretation of the lyrics overall. I kind of ignored my own half recollection of this party story, and I interpreted it in a different way. And it may be a simplistic way, and I'm just kind of interpreting the lyrics as a whole. But I interpret these as actually a very sweet lyric, as an expression of kind of sweet love and appreciation between two people who happen to be two kind of doomed people. I kind of had this vision of Eitzel the barfly with some other kind of bar dweller person, right? The stereotypical kind of scene that sometimes I think these lyrics paint, where it's they may be fuck ups, they may be doomed in some real way or some perceived way, but they have one another and they appreciate one another, and regardless of what everybody on the outside, the cops and all the people who aren't them, say about the two of them, they have one another. And honestly, I think that's again, no idea whether that's really what he's talking about here, but I always felt like that's kind of the feeling I always got from these lyrics, and I retain it, and I love it. I just think it's a very sweet sweet doomed love kind of a sentiment.
So my question then is, why Hollywood?
Don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Where does Voodie live? Voodie's an LA guy, right?
Well, I'm not sure where he lived then. I will say that I do know that this album was recorded in LA.
Oh, was it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that was difficult for the band. It was not an experience, being in LA for that period of time was apparently not something that they necessarily really enjoyed. But yeah, it was recorded down in LA for them. So they were down there for the duration of these sessions.
Well, but when did they record this? This would have been before the recording, right?
Yeah.
April of 92. I mean, they were probably doing demos and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you would imagine, right? I'm not certain when the recording of the album actually started and when those initial sessions with Chooglin began. But yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery to me, but I do personally, I really like these lyrics. I think it's a very sweet sentiment. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the production here. We were just talking about unusual percussion, and this song is really dominated by unusual percussion. It has, I think, it's either a talking drum or a djembe, I believe, that is kind of that, like, kind of warping sound percussion, if you know what I mean. It almost is like you're leaning on a drum conga head or something while you're hitting it. But it's an unusual choice for the band. It feels to me, honestly, quite dated now, and I just felt like it was symptomatic of the production of this album. It just was like interesting for interesting's sake.
Yeah, this is what I mean when it like whimsical. Like it sounds like there's like one of those carousel piano things on the, and it drifts into like Tom Waits kind of territory.
Yes,
I think like it's
Good
got this
call.
like circus kind, and and it is interesting because it's like this is another waltz time song, and it's got all of these strange, but it does feel a little bit now like maybe like trying too hard, to do something whimsical and fun or different or whatever.
Yeah, it just seems to me like the production on this one, there are definitely interesting things that are done musically. You mentioned that like waltz time, that 3/4 waltz time chorus has very, I think you're right on when you call out Tom Waits here, that very kind of organ grindery feel. But then at the end of each bar, there's a bar of 2/4. So it's an odd time thing that happens. The 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, 2/4, 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, 2/4. And so it gives you this sense of like the rhythm kind of flipping over once. And they do the same thing with that djembe in the verses. Actually, it's a classic kind of 3/4, like a 3/4 or 6/8 over 4/4 kind of happening at the same time. So they interlock in strange ways, this polyrhythmic kind of approach. They do that in the verses. And again, if you're kind of willing to like really dig in and like listen to it, there's a lot in there to, to like latch onto and think about. And it's all quite interesting, but somehow or another, I feel like it leaves the listener, in my opinion, with like no one part of the song to kind of really grab onto. And my instinct is that the underlying song here is quite lovely.
Yeah, it feels like the production doesn't necessarily serve the song in a way.
Yeah.
It's like the production was like, ooh, let's try this. I've Been a Mess.
Yeah.
Everything in that production serves the song, and this one feels a little like, let's experiment, let's have fun on this one, and I don't hate it, but it's not one of my faves.
Yeah, I this is one of these ones where I would have liked to have heard the kind of more classic country waltz version of this song. I just think it somehow would be a bit more timeless and a bit more indicative of the rest of the band's catalog. But hey, listen, we experiment and that's how we grow, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so is it time now to move on to the song that I said was production malpractice?
Yes.
Okay, it is time. All right, so then why don't we do it? This song, previously known as Nothing Can Bring Me Down, on this album, it is known as What Godzilla Said to God When He Found His Name Wasn't in the Book of Life. It is 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Let's give it a listen.
I don't care what dreams you have. I don't care about your second sight. Now that you cut yourself off, yeah, I'm sure things are clear and bright. Or did you let it take hold of your soul? Was it like moonrise over your desert shore? And tell me, is it more evil to lose your heart or to go on as before? What could come around? Yeah, what could make a difference to me now? What could come around? Nothing could bring me down.
All right, Jay William. It's got to be one of the great chorus lyrics in his entire catalog, right?
Yes. Now, the thing that I will note, first of all, lyrically, so obviously, you know, he did a version of this song, Nothing Can Bring Me Down, on Songs of Love Live, solo acoustic. There are some significant lyrical alterations between that version and the version that's on this album that I think shifts sort of the tone of the song. And, you know, to give a song called Nothing Can Bring Me Down, where you sing Nothing Can Bring Me Down in the chorus, to What Godzilla Said to God When His Name Wasn't Found in the Book of Life. Like, that is a example, I would argue, of fuck you, big label. I'm not going to shorten my goddamn song titles to make it easy for your mass consumption. Like, you know, it's self-sabotage in a way, just in terms of, you know.
Yeah.
How are people going to remember the title? You know what I mean? I applaud it. You know, but it probably hurt.
But again, it's interesting. They've made that decision, and yet it's difficult for me to interpret the production of this song, which we'll talk about in a second, as anything other than them weirdly trying to figure out a way how to make this really achingly beautiful, sad song into something that's like poppy, you know? And I think they just end up in a really bad spot in the middle. But before we get into that, I just think generally, I have always interpreted this song as kind of just generally being about fading love. But I did have a question I wondered if you had any kind of way into. There are lyrics in here where he repeats the number 52 twice. And I don't know, like, what is the significance of 52?
I will tell you, I wondered that myself, and then I read the previous line. It's about a deck of cards.
Oh,
it's 52 cards in the deck. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. That is true. I was like, God, 52 weeks in a year? Is that what it is? But no, okay.
Right.
52 cards in a deck. That makes actually a lot more sense. Thank you for that, Jay William.
You know, that little couplet or whatever was not in the Songs of Love Live version.
Yeah.
This is like a new addition.
Yeah. So if you're ready to kind of move, are you ready to move on to the lyrics? Or onto the music, rather?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I've already said it. I think that this is production malpractice. I'm going to start with this drum loop. I'm assuming this is a loop. It sounds like a loop to me. It may not be, but it has this very kind of bouncy drum loop feel. And it just feels like why did they decide to do that on this? It feels profoundly wrong for this song to me.
So when My note here is that it sound like when it starts, it sounds like a coffee house jam.
Yeah.
It sounds like this is like Rusted Root,
Yes.
like the samples.
Yeah.
It's got that vibe to it, which that was having a moment, sort of like intertwined with the grunge era or whatever. And I think that these are production choices that were meant to kind of try to tie them into the zeitgeist a little more closely,
Yeah, I completely agree. It's undeniable that that's what Froome was going for here and the band was going for here. It is a testament, in my opinion, to how unbelievably lovely the underlying song is, and especially the chorus is, that it still stands out here in and among this production. I feel like I'm gonna blame Froome. May not be his fault, but I'm gonna make him the bad guy here.
Someone's got to take the fall.
He managed to take what I think is a truly lovely, classic, beautiful song and make it sound like incidental music from an episode of The Real World.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it sounds like this is a song that, like, Eitzel wrote it on his own. He had his solo version, and then they were kind of like, Froome or whoever was deciding on songs for the album was like, oh, we got to put that song on the album, and so they had to come up with an arrangement for the full band.
Yeah,
and there was no, this is an example, because we've talked about like how Eitzel, along the way, he has these songs that he does solo acoustic, and the band doesn't really get in the way.
Yeah.
But it's like in this one, they tried to, let's come up with a band version of this. And, I mean, again, it's like they're experimenting and there's some unusual production choices here. I think Voodie does some really cool stuff. He's got these sort of twin guitar squalls. He does a lot of guitar squalling on this album, but the song itself, the solo acoustic version feels like the better version.
Yeah. That's an understatement right there. That is the understatement of the year.
Yeah.
I think that the reason that this song is really the moment, I think, where I kind of like, when it came together for me, I was just like, yeah, I think I really dislike the production on this album overall. I think it's this song, because as we talked about in the Songs of Love Live episode, this is one of my favorite Eitzel songs, without a doubt. And I just think it is such an unbelievably achingly beautiful song.
Let me ask you this: the title.
Yeah.
What's your interpretation? How does that relate to the rest of the lyric?
I don't think it does. I think it's a joke written backwards, right? I do think that, like, this song is fundamentally similarly to If I Had a Hammer, right? Where, like, it has this seemingly hopeful chorus, superficially seemingly hopeful chorus. Maybe I'm almost there. But I think within the context of the lyrics, he's talking much more about maybe I'm already as low as I possibly can go. I think that this song is essentially the same message in the lyric, right? I just think that that's fundamentally the message of the what could come around, what could make a difference to me now, what could come around, nothing can bring me down. It's really, he's not saying I'm so happy that I can't be brought down. He's saying I'm so low already. There's nothing more you can do to bring me lower. And I think it's kind of like making this joke, like Godzilla is basically saying to God, like, wow, you fucked me in all these other ways. There's nothing more that you can do to me that's going to make this any worse, right? I know, but I think he's basically reinforcing that in a jokey way. And I do think there's a more than a little bit of that kind of punk rock attitude in Eitzel that I think you correctly identified. For me, though, the loveliness of the song is not at all impacted negatively, regardless of what, how kind of goofy and long the title of the song is.
Yeah.
I just think that if if they if the Songs of Love live version was called on that album What Godzilla Said to God, blah blah blah, I would like it just as well. I just think it is such an internally beautiful song. I think it's just awesome. For me, really, the issue here is the production approach to it. And I started to get these kind of like weird internal conspiracy theories, like, God, maybe the label said to Froom, you can't have more than 4 songs that are fully downbeat on this, so you got to figure out and so I was like imagining them like being like, well, God, all these songs are pretty downbeat. We've got to figure out which ones we can turn into like poppier songs. And so they just started jamming. And I can't imagine that something that kind of clumsy would ever have actually been done like overtly, but that was the feeling that I got after hitting this song. All right, so we are now on to Jay William, the final song on side A of Mercury. It is Keep Me Around, 2 minutes and 53 seconds. Shall we give it a listen?
Let's do that.
All right.
There's so little love left in my heart for anyone. I'm like an ant on your map. You can't see me going down the train. You can't see me going down. Will you keep me around? 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 Will you keep me around?
Okay, there it is. Now, I know that you have strong feelings here, so I want to hear them.
Well, first of all, so this song was eventually released as a single,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's
And-
right. Yeah, there are 2 singles off the album. I think it was Johnny Mathis Feet and Keep Me Around, I think.
There are 3 singles off of the album. Over and Done is the other one.
Okay.
And there's some interesting B-sides on those singles. I don't know how deep you dove, but I don't want to get into that here. The thing that I am offended greatly. So I already alluded earlier that I'm dissatisfied with the track order of this album.
Yeah.
When I had always assumed, because I was introduced and heard this album on CD. So for some reason in my head, I thought Keep Me Around was the first track on side B, which made sense to me. It's a more upbeat feeling, it was released as a single, so it seems like a track 1, side 2 kind of thing. No, it's the final track on side 1. That makes no sense. None.
Really?
I don't know who's to blame.
I have to say that the track listing on this album, I have some real questions about that as we get into side B, but I do think that the track order on this is like much less interesting and good than like Engine, for example, which I think has a really good kind of sequencing of the tracks.
Hey, don't worry, listeners. I'm going to fix it for you. I'm going to give you J. William Hall's version, the remastered, reordered version of Mercury at the end of next episode.
Yeah, excellent.
Stay
Well,
tuned.
I like that. This song, though, I think, at least if we're going to dig into the lyrics, I think that it is a very direct lyric about a struggle with alcohol, I think, unsurprisingly. But I can't quite suss out, personally, whether it's kind of a post-Clean Eitzel lyric or a drinking Eitzel lyric. And I don't know. I found it simultaneously too on the nose, and also a little bit tough to read, which is completely oxymoronic, I guess. But I maybe suffice it to say these are not my favorite Eitzel lyrics.
So here's my interpretation, different than yours. This to me sounds like a paranoid partner who is so down on themselves that they're convinced that their partner's going to leave them.
Yeah, okay.
And they're desperately saying, "Will you keep me around?"
Yeah.
That's my interpretation of it. But I agree with you that there is no light in these lyrics. Like it is all dark, and it's sort of like borderline like paranoid, like
Yeah.
in a like, whoa, like it would be surprising if the partner was like, don't worry, I'll keep you around after like this kind of like, so that is my interpretation of it. But the thing that is strange about this one is that, it was a single. Clearly they tried to give it a big, more of like a pop kind of production.
Yeah.
And what a odd choice of lyrics, for a song. Like it's so dark and desperate sounding, and it doesn't match with the tone of the song itself, like the music of this,
Yeah, I feel like I've kind of bounced back and forth between really liking and appreciating the approach that, again, I'm going to kind of just attribute to Mitchell Froom, and really disliking it. This is one of the only songs on the album that to me was recognizable as having that pre-Everclear AMC songwriting style. So if you think about it, if you think about this, just the song, as a song that appears on the album California. Imagine this song, just the songwriting, appearing on California, and this production being applied to California-era AMC songs. I would like it. I know that's a very convoluted thing to say, but I guess what I'm saying is this is a much more straightforward kind of rock country song, in my opinion. But the production of a more straightforward rock country song by Mitchell Froom, I like better than the Tom Mallon work on California, which I felt like had this sterility and kind of tautness that just felt, it was just antiseptic. This one I think has some looseness to it. It's like kind of groovy. I don't know. I think I really like the production on this song. But I also think it's one of the least interesting songs on the album.
Yeah, it sounds the most kind of like generic, kind of mainstreamy sound to it.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I have a note about like I don't like the drums on this one. Like they feel very shuffly versus like rockin'. Like I felt like this one needed to be a little more like it needed more muscle or something, and it feels a little like softer in a way, and I don't know, something's not quite jiving for me on this one.
I felt the same way, but I have to say, as counter as this is to the rest of my a lot of the comments I've made so far, I actually feel like the performance, the production on this song are good, and they're better than the song itself. I think in the end, my feeling was, this is just kind of a song that maybe should not have been included on the album overall. Not because of the way it turned out after recording it, but because I think the underlying material it's not quite up to the standard of the rest of the songs on this album, which I think is an extraordinarily high standard.
It feels like a deliberate attempt on Eitzel's part to write like a more mainstream pop style song, like with a big chorus, and you repeat it, and I think the band does an admirable job, and I like hearing Danny's like echo kind of background vocal in the chorus. Yeah, but it feels slight or something, like compared to some of, their other songs.
Yeah. And before we kind of call it a day, finish off side A, I do have to point out the fade here. So this is a semi-fade. It is better than a full-on fade, but it is not much better. So when I say semi-fade, it's like the band, it starts to fade out, but you hear the band stop playing as it's fading out, right? So it's kind of a, it's a semi-fade. In any case, Jay William, we're at the end of side A. What an interesting album to backtrack. I think both you and I have come through this process of backtracking this album with thoughts and feelings about the album that are very different than what we might have predicted we would be feeling, before we started on this project, correct?
I feel changed. I feel different.
Yeah, I do too. I have an appreciation for this album that is very different than what I remember. But yeah, in any case, I think this is a really, really fun one, a really, really interesting one to go through. So we're going to be back next week with side B of Mercury. We're going to finish this one off. But before we do that, you're going to have to wait 7 short days. During that 7 days, there are a couple of things you can do. Number 1, you can hit the like button, god damn it. Number 2, you can hit the follow button. Number 3, share it. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your neighbors, share it with people they haven't seen in a while, share it with your coworkers. Whoever you might want to share this with, just go ahead and share it. And finally, Jay Williams, just write a review. Just write a 5-star review. Just rave about the quality of this podcast. It helps us with the algorithms, guys. We don't know exactly what they're doing, but what we know for sure is a 5-star review will force our podcast into the ears of unexpected citizens of the technologically informed parts of the world.
There are literally millions of millennial and Generation Z listeners out there who are on the podcasts and they're thinking, oh, you know, it'd be cool to learn about a new obscure band, and they're trying to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and they hear about American Music Club and they're like, we're going to check out this podcast. They're going to learn more than they care to.
Yes.
About American Music Club and the opinions of 2 dumb schlubs talking about it.
Yeah, that's right. So please just make it easy for those young folks to find it by doing all of the things that we've just described. Now,
I would suggest that the ideal way to share it is via email, as we are Generation X, but those younger listeners won't get to it.
You know, you might want to you might want to Snapchat them, right? With a link. Is
do
that
it on
what the younger people do? They Snapchat.
Yeah, you TikTok it.
You TikTok
right?
it.
You
TikTok
Snapchat it.
Yeah,
come on.
you know
Come on,
what? We should start a TikTok trend where we do kind of fun, sassy dances to various American Music Club songs. And perhaps they involve, like, you know, a water balloon or you know, whatever goofy things they do on TikTok. I don't have TikTok. I don't go on the TikTok, so I don't know. But my understanding is there's a lot of dancing.
I think that's a fine idea. I am worried about what the Chinese government would do with these dances to American Music Clubs.
I listen. We're on the cusp of war. Give them that ammunition. That may be exactly what they need to finally invade Taiwan. Is the data from the American Music Club fans dancing.
You could argue that it is unpatriotic to dance to American Music Club on Chinese-owned TikTok.
Well, you know, we've actually just gone full circle from recommending that people dance to American Music Club on TikTok to telling them that they're unpatriotic if they do it. I think that we need to go away. We need to woodshed a little bit, put together a position paper, come back next week and tell them exactly how to approach this TikTok thing. What do you think?
I agree.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. All right, so listen, Jay William, as always, it's been fun. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your energy. And listeners, thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.